Okay.
What, his name is Caleb Miller from Carl Hospital. He's on the leadership team there, and he's going to speak about coronavirus and its impact on the hospital, the healthcare workers, the patients, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that'll be a good meeting.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Bob, for setting that up.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay. Daryl, are we ready to go to your Facebook Live setup?
I need you to stop sharing your screen so I can do something.
Oh, okay. Sorry. How about that? Meeting is now streaming on Facebook.
We are official.
We are official. Okay, Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Ellen Wuellner. She's the Executive Director of the Forest Preserve District. I've had the privilege to be a member of the Board of Commissioners for the Forest Preserves for 8 years now, and have sort of a fun history. I worked for the Forest Preserves as a seasonal when I was in graduate school, so it's been a real pleasure for me to serve on the Forest Preserves, but also, as we'll talk about today, to kind of see behind the scenes some of the need that exists. So Mary Ellen has worked there for, more than 10 years. She had a distinguished career working in city government before she started on as a grant writer at the Forest Preserve District, and has worked her way up over time to the lead position. We're very fortunate to have someone who is so good with people, so deeply cares about the mission of the organization, and during a very difficult time, as you can imagine, for anyone that's leading an organization, business, government agency, has a lot of additional challenges in addition to the job and the things that they did just a year ago. So I'm going to let Mary Ellen start us off here, and then we will tag team back and forth on today's presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for giving Andrew and me part of your meeting this morning to talk about a project that we have coming up at the Forest Preserve District, coming up here this November 3rd, which you might recognize as Election Day. We are the Forest Preserve District, and we are putting an initiative on the ballot this November. Next slide, Andrew.
Hang on, I figured this out yesterday. Okay.
There we go.
So for those of you that have likely visited some of these different sites around the county, I just want to touch on a little bit about each of them. So Lake of the Woods, I'm sure, is the one that most people are aware of and know about. That has the Museum of the Grand Prairie. It has the covered bridge that you can see there on the left. How many people here remember the sea slide? Are there enough people around back in the day for the sea slides? Okay, yeah.
Oh, gosh,
so for obvious risk management purposes, the sea slide is no longer there, but there's still a ton of amenities when we look at, hiking trails, the botanical gardens. Actually, the botanical gardens, as I mentioned before, I was a seasonal that worked there, so I have a very special connection on that place. That's also one of the first, one of the first sites where my wife Maggie and I went on a picnic on a date, and so there's these wonderful memories as you go to these different places, and we walk by there, at least once or twice a year and say, oh, remember when we did that, and sort of the special place that holds. Other ones, lots of people have heard about Homer Lake. I'm sure many of you have been out there, and the wonderful trails. If you're looking for bluebells in the spring, Homer Lake is probably one of the best places in the county to go and see big fields of bluebells. I actually saw Tom Kasich out there this past spring. It was sort of funny in consecutive visits that clearly we were both hunting for the best day to be there when the most bluebells were out. Also, if you have kids or grandkids, Homer Lake is wonderful for the natural playscape that was installed there years ago that has all kinds of wonderful features for kids to get out and run around, including the always popular water feature that simulates a stream and that kids can sit there and manipulate. It's a ton of fun. Middle Fork up in the northeast part of the county, up by Penfield, is likely one that maybe some people haven't heard about. It's our largest preserve. There's some very large tracts of land out there, some great areas to view wildlife. So if you see wildlife photos from the forest preserves, there's a good chance that they came from out there. There's I think there's been bald eagles there. We've seen sandhill cranes. There's all kinds of amazing wildlife out at Middle Fork. And Middle Fork is also home to the county's only swimming beach, as well as a wonderful campground. So very interestingly, if you look at the data over time after the 2008-2009 Great Recession, camping was one of those activities that really took off across the country because people were looking for fun, affordable ways to go out and get away, right? That maybe you couldn't afford a big expensive vacation, but you could get a camper, get a tent, and go out and enjoy the outdoors. And so we love it that, you know, Middle Fork has been booked most weekends for the last 10 years in the summer, just because it's a place that people want to go and it's beautiful out there. It is also the state's first international dark sky park. So we had a group of very dedicated volunteers to work to get that designation. You can see there in the upper right, the North Waterfowl area. If you have not been out to Middle Fork to go look at the stars, it is breathtaking. And anytime that you see some kind of comet or meteor shower or something that's going on, the local astronomers group is likely going to be out there because they've taken a very keen interest. David Leake, who was the longtime director of the planetarium and professor at Parkland College, has been a dedicated volunteer and is actually involved with our organization as we look towards November with this referendum. So the other two forest preserves, Sangamon River, which is sort of a hidden gem up by Fisher, has some beautiful trails. Also has what I think of one of the coolest and also eeriest experiences that you can have in the forest preserves. If you go in the springtime when the frogs are calling, it is truly sounds like you're in a different world when the frogs get going, and you can just, it's a noise unlike any other. And very fortunately, the sort of main area, fairly close to the entrance, there's a great sign there that sort of explains some of the different things that you're going to hear. And then River Bend, which is down by the Mid-America Quarry on the south side of Mahomet, is one of those also hidden gems that has, anytime that you go there, when I was there a lot, at a lot of these forest preserves in the spring, when you're trying to find things to do with the kids, there's always people out there fishing and hiking around. So great things to do around these different preserves and parks in the county. I touched on some of these already, but I wanted to bring up a few other ones. So the Kickapoo Rail Trail, I forgot to mention that. That's our 6th preserve. So it's the only rail trail in East Central Illinois. If you look at the community surveys that we take, as well as community surveys that people do across the country for parks and forest preserves, agencies like ours, trails are always the #1 thing that people want. They're looking for places where they can get out and walk. They want to get off the streets. They want to go in some place in nature. They want to see beautiful sights. They want shade. They want fun things to do. And so for those of you that have been around Champaign-Urbana a while and know that that rail trail effort for the Kickapoo Rail Trail was a long time coming. So there was a group, a dedicated group back in the 80s and 90s that was working to raise money even then to try to purchase that trail. And so we're very fortunate that we were able to acquire that from CSX and slowly start to build that up over time. One of the great things with that trail is that there were no local dollars that went into the construction of that trail. So we were able to get grant money to pay for all of it. And that's often one of the big things that we hear from people when they say, oh, referendum, but you guys just built that rail trail. We did, but we didn't use any local tax money to do it. So what we're looking for now is all the other amenities that we have that we can't get grant funding for, that we need additional resources to help pay for. So one of the other things, I know there's several golfers in the group. So the golf course out at Lake of the Woods, show of hands how many people have played there, even if it hasn't been recently. Yeah, so the golf course is an Audubon certified golf course. So we take our nature very seriously, and we're very proud of that designation. I know last year that there were some issues with the course in terms of some of the greens and some algae blooms and things like that, but from all the reports this year, the course is doing great. I haven't been out there recently to look at the conditions, but I've heard from the staff that things are going really well. including some bunker reconstructions, which hopefully makes the course a lot better. Okay, so one of the things, as you likely gathered already, is that we're very proud of all the things that we do, but when we connect in with our mission in terms of what the organization is about, connecting people to nature, there's all these things, right? Whether it's about clean air, clean water, getting out in the forest, getting out into the prairie. There's a very strong environmental mission that we provide. And then there's a big mission of just connecting people, right? We often think about this from my background in the Parks and Recreation field. You think, oh yeah, it's about kids and getting kids out into nature. But obviously that connection doesn't lessen as you get older, right? Maybe you spend less time doing that, but it's no less important. And if you're friends with Larry and Judy Johnson on Facebook, you know what I'm talking about, because they post pictures all the time of every hiking adventure they've gone on, which is wonderful. I've tried to thank Larry, and I'll thank him again for all the free publicity for all the places he's gone around the area. We're truly fortunate to have such great amenities in Champaign County. And my own personal story, I grew up in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. I came to Champaign-Urbana for graduate school, and I still remember talking with people about the prairie and this idea of not being from the Midwest. And I think sometimes people just kind of take it for granted. Oh yeah, it's the prairie. That's the thing we had long ago, and all these plants, and yeah, pollinators, that's cool. But where I grew up in Pennsylvania, we didn't have sections of prairie. It was all hilly and rocky, and it was terrible soil, and you couldn't grow anything. And so the uniqueness of this kind of landscape is really amazing. Yes, it's flat, and we all sort of joke about that and understand that as part of our environment. But that flatness provides such amazing environmental treasures. And so when I think to the experiences that I've had to be able to go out and go hiking or take my kids fishing or do all kinds of things, there's so many amazing resources out there that as an adult I have learned to appreciate, especially during COVID-19. One of the press releases that we sent out as we were going into referendum, and the thing that I feel very strongly about is that parks shouldn't have access fees, right? It should be free. If you're a young family and you don't have a lot of money, it shouldn't cost you money to go out to a park. But obviously these things cost tax dollars, right? That's how we're supported. And so it's wonderful to be able to provide these resources for people across the county for all the different things that we do, and recognizing at the same time that by doing, prairie restoration and forestry restoration, we're providing that clean air and clean water that's so important now more than ever when we think about the impacts of climate change and how we want to continue to be good stewards of our local resources. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Mary Ellen.
So thank you, Andrew. So I get to talk about sort of the behind the scenes. One of the things that I like to brag about is our wonderful staff. And if you've been to, and I'm sure you have, been to any of the forest preserves lately, you thinking to yourself, they look great. And that's really a tribute to the amazing staff that we have here. They do just a phenomenal job on a very small budget to keep the preserves looking wonderful. Natural areas are some of the best in the state of Illinois, and the visitor experience is just unlike any other in this part of the state. But if you look a little deeper, we do have our challenges, and that's a result of a very tight budget that we've been on, which I'll talk about in a minute. But just here are some examples. We had a board meeting in August and early August, and I had asked the staff to provide some photos of some of the challenges that we're faced with, and I put some here on the slide. So some of these old shelters at all of our preserves, these were some of the original shelters. They're metal, they're deteriorating and in need of replacement. This is the lower right, no, that'd be left hand corner. That's the Spillway at Lake of the Woods. If you've driven through Lake of the Woods at all recently, you can see the condition that spillway is in. That's a sizable project, and Andrew talked a little bit about like the rail trail, and we're able to get, we've been very fortunate to get grants and donations that have allowed us to complete some big projects. But for something like a spillway repair or a dam repair, there's very little grant funding available for things like that. Same way with roads, road conditions. We have miles and miles of roads, infrastructure through the forest preserves. That's just not something that you can find grant funding to repair. Equipment is old and is in need of replacement. And this is one of our lovely restrooms at our golf maintenance shop. That's not a place you'd certainly want to spend a lot of time. But these are projects that, these are just upkeep and maintenance that needs to be done. We simply don't have the resources within the existing budget to address things like this. Let me show the next one. There we go. There's some more. So same thing with roofs. So several roofs throughout the district that are in need of repair, in need of replacement. One that I don't have a picture of is the covered bridge in Mahomet. It's kind of an iconic feature. You'll see the village of Mahomet is very proud and uses that in almost all of their marketing materials. When you think of the forest preserves, you think of that covered bridge, and it's in that roof is now time for replacement. Trails, walkways. The photo here of the children, that's a picture of our Homer Lake Interpretive Center. That's the nature center at Homer Lake, just inside the entrance to the preserve as you come in. That building was initially a residence for one of the early staff that worked at Homer Lake, and we converted it years and years ago into an environmental education facility. And the demand for environmental education has grown tremendously over the years. So this is a picture of the kids actually having class in one of the storage rooms because it was probably a rainy day and they couldn't take the kids outside. But we like to be able to serve people. So we have converted the storage room into classroom space, which, the kids think is kind of cool, but it's really not the best situation for teaching. So that's another big project that's on our list that we would like to address if we had the resources to do so. So I think the next slide is about the financial picture. For those of you who are into the numbers. So if you look at this graph here, this is a sort of graphical depiction of what your Champaign County property tax bill looks like. You can see the various taxing bodies that receive a portion of your property taxes. If you look at that little blue sliver at the top of that pie, that's the portion that goes to the Champaign County Forest Preserves. It's less than 1% of your tax bill, and that's less than 10 cents per $100 of EAV. It's depending on where you live in Champaign County, it's either the smallest taxing body on your bill or the second smallest behind a cemetery district. And that is only part of the issue. The additional, sort of compounding factor to that is that in 1996, when tax caps were coming into effect, most taxing bodies set their bond levy at an amount that would be sustainable for the long term, knowing that it would be capped at that amount going forward. In a very sort of fiscally conservative gesture, our board at that time did not do so and actually set our bond levy at just less than 200,000. It was like 199,863 or something. And that's what it's been capped at until 2009, when the state legislature allowed for it to increase by CPI. So even at this time in 2020, our bond levy is at about $245,000. And that makes up—
Mary Ellen,
yeah.
I jump in here. So just so everyone's clear, in 1996, I was only 15, so I was not on the board at that point to set that fiscally conservative number. Sorry, go ahead.
But that makes up, and now clearly that's not our entire budget, but that makes up the bulk of our annual capital budget each year. And so you can imagine with 4,000 acres of land and infrastructure, buildings, roads, dams, bridges, et cetera, some of those things I showed you earlier, we just can't manage on that budget alone. So kind of our bottom line here is that we just can't continue to carry out our conservation mission and maintain the preserves, particularly the older preserves. I mean, all of our buildings and infrastructure at Homer Lake, Lake of the Woods, and Middle Fork, which were our first 3 preserves, everything there is 40 to 60 years old. So it's all coming due at the same time. So when you go to the ballot box or you get your mail-in ballot, or you go and vote early at one of your polling places, this is the ballot language that you will find. Probably down at the bottom of the ballot, you'll have to flip the page over to see it. And this is language that is provided by state statute. This is not something that Andrew sat and came up with.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
It would have been much more plain, I think, if Andrew had written it. But this is the language that you will see, and this is what we are asking for. So, and if you want to take a minute here and just kind of read through that, I can let you do that. But essentially what we're asking for is a 0.016% increase over the limiting rate. And what that equates to is a little over a penny and a half per $100 of assessed value. So hit the button there. Well, I don't know, let people read it, I guess.
Can I make a comment while people are reading this?
Sure.
I volunteer at the Museum of the Grand Prairie.
Oh,
and
great.
One of the things that I do is I catalog items that come in. And it's a repository for the history of this area, and there just isn't another place that really does that. I'll give you an example. A year or so ago, a long time ago, someone donated a bunch of Civil War information. One of the things they donated was they had gone back and looked at all of the records of everybody who in Champaign County was in the Civil War in each individual unit and from where they were from. It was on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. It was typed. It was that old. If he didn't donate that, it was lost. And with all the history, that's our history. And that's so important to maintain, and we often don't do that. One of the things that I talk about here in Champaign County is, and it's true of the Midwest as well, we have this wonderful farmland. We have no sense of our own history. Our history, we have history all around us. And yet you go to out in Colorado and there's a little stream and they build a museum around it. Like we got tons of those here. That's my and the people that work there are wonderful. I mean, they're so dedicated to what they do. But that's our history. Our history is there, and they're recording it. And right now, one of the things I'm supposed to be doing is transcribing letters that were done by the Busey family to his wife, and those are lost if you don't, and yet that's our history. So that's my comment while people were reading it, and I think it's so important, and I think that's why the museum is so important in that mission.
That's neat.
Hey, thanks, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's awesome. I didn't even pay him to say that. All right, hit the button there so that one. Okay, so this is in all of that ballot language. This is the paragraph I think that will resonate with people the most, and this is really the point that I want to make. Is the low cost to the small amount that the Forest Preserve is asking for. So for the 2020 levy year, and this would go into effect next year, for this year's taxes that you pay next year. The additional amount extendable against property with a single family residence with a fair market value of $100,000 is estimated to be $5.33, and that's per year. And the reason that they choose that $100,000 figure, of course, is so that you can do the math to your own situation. If you're a $200,000 homeowner, you can expect that your increase would be about $10.66. So go to the next slide, and there's just some more figures there. Kind of just doing some of that math for you. The median home value in Champaign County, I didn't know if you know this, is $157,800. That median home, the owner of that median home, the median, you know what I'm saying, that person will pay $8.42 additional each year. And then there's those other two examples. Just to give you a comparison with agricultural parcels, an 80-acre ag field would add about $8 a year in taxes. The owner of a 400-acre farm would see about a $41 a year increase. So, 92% of Champaign County is in agriculture, and so I want to make sure that that information is out there so that you have an understanding of what the impact is across the board.
Okay, so I get to do the fun doom and gloom part here, which is, if we're getting to the point now where, Mary Ellen mentioned with the covered bridge. So, if there's not resources there to replace the bridge roof, then that thing is going to start to deteriorate. It's the same thing with a lot of our picnic shelters, right? We likely, if this doesn't pass, then we're going to have to take picnic shelters out and not be able to put them back. And, that's such a tough thing because, we've been talking about going to referendum since I joined the board just because of the financial need. And then one of the things that the staff has always said to me is, hey, we don't want it to seem like we're not doing our job and doing it well. And that's an important point for me to communicate, because it's not that people aren't doing a great job. It's that there's just not enough resources to go around. And like every place, you have to make tough choices. When you get to the point that we have where you say, we're having to make tough choices where we can only do 1 in every 3 or 1 in every 4 projects that really should happen, then you start to have problems, because then it's not just facilities, then you're looking at staff. And that's a very difficult thing when you're entrusted with the mission that we are. So as Charlie noted, right, it's cultural resources in addition to natural resources. And we do a ton of programs. We do a lot of these things with outreach. Most kids that are in Champaign County in a non-COVID-19 year go out to the Museum of the Grand Prairie, or they go out to the Homer Lake Interpretive Center as part of the school field trip. They're engaged in these environmental education programs. That's wonderful. We work very closely with schools to make that happen. And even this spring, we did a lot of virtual stuff. The staff did to work with schools and teachers to make those kinds of things happen. So if the resources aren't there, then you start looking at reduced services, you look at closing things down, and certainly less programs. And no one wants to do that, particularly in a time right now where you recognize how important it is to have that sort of human connection. So ways that you can help, hopefully you have seen some of these signs around. I've actually had members of this club that told me that they already got a sign from somebody else, which is wonderful. So if you're interested, or you just want to learn more, or to get a recap of the things that we talked about today, there's a website there, Yes to Forests. We ask if you have questions, let us know, and get involved somehow. Obviously, this is it's a taxpayer-funded agency that everyone gets to use. So we're excited to be able to move forward and see this on the ballot in November. Okay, and with that, we can take any questions. Other paid testimonials. Thank you, Charlie.
Andrew.
Yeah.
I don't understand why you're not having any grants or funds from state or federal government. I don't understand that.
So Mary Ellen touched on this a little bit before. So we can get grants for some projects, but grants don't go for everything. So I'll give you an example, right? The rail trail, there's a lot of money in the state and federal government for surface trails. And so we've been very successful. Mary Ellen in particular has been very successful as a grant writer to get those dollars in to fund that construction. But for some things, the state and the federal grants it's either there's nothing that covers that, or they expressly don't allow that. So there's a state grant called the OSLAD, the Open Space Land Acquisition and Development, OSLAD. And one of the big projects we have out at Middle Fork is that the pond out there has a leak. It's old, like a lot of other things. We need to drain it. We need to reline it and then refill it so that it's good for hopefully another 30, 40, 50 years. Well, that grant project, the dollar amount there is easily in $300,000-400,000 range. So it's not something that we can just absorb out of our monthly or our annual capital budget. That's, that'd be several years of our capital budget when we have all these other needs. Well, the granting application expressly says you can't do pond dredging and restoration. So it's some of those things, the stuff that we want to do, like Mary Ellen mentioned with the dam spillway at Lake of the Woods, that's not covered under some of these granting applications. So the opportunities aren't there. And trust me, we've explored them. So it's not that, it's not for lack of trying. It's just sometimes we've even gotten partway through into these applications and the state agency will say, hang on, you can't apply for that. That's one of those, the way the rules are written, that's not allowed. So we've done what we can, which is why we've gotten to the point where we are now, right? That's the sense of urgency that there's been a lot of efforts in order to get to this point, but there's some additional resources are needed.
I'll just add to that a lot of those grants that we do go after are 50. Oh, there you are. Are 50% grants or even 80-20. So 80% grant, but then the local community has to make up a match. Sometimes it's a 1-for-1 match. Sometimes it's 1-to-4 match. But that's one of the things about getting this additional revenue into our budget, is that we will be able to actually go after additional grants because we will have the ability to match them, where right now, and Jared was working with us recently as a grant writer, and I know it was frustrating. It's been frustrating for me as grants coordinator. It was frustrating for Jared that we had to let some grants go because we were not able to provide that match for it. So the funds that we get through these tax dollars will actually leverage additional state and federal grants.
I have two questions, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah,
First,
go.
I don't remember if the slideshow said it, but when was the last time the Forest Preserve District went for a referendum?
We went the only other time we've gone was in 2008, and we were not successful. But
then since the organization, there has never been a tax increase from the start, correct?
Correct. Since 1940, since we opened our doors in 1948, we have never had a taxpayer-supported referendum happen. So yeah, it's been, what is that, 72 years? We think it's time.
Yeah. Second question is, I know that there's a significant backlog of projects that need to be done. You guys just barely scratched the surface, I think, of what the needs are for the Forest Preserve District. So if you do pass, cast a vision for us of what's the first things you want to see done for both of you.
Right. Well, and Andrew mentioned one of them. I think Willow Pond, which is the only swimming beach in the county, is got to be at the top of that list. We've actually done some fundraising. We didn't mention we have a Forest Preserve Friends Foundation, a 501c3 organization that was developed in the 80s to help support, raise revenue through some grants, just through private donations. And we did start some fundraising towards that Willow Pond restoration. That's the one that Andrew mentioned is not eligible for state grant funding. We're slowly losing that pond. In fact, this year, partly because of COVID and just partly because of the condition of that pond, we are not even opening it. And it's as I mentioned, it's the only swimming beach in the county, and it's part of that camping experience. That's our campground. People have memories of growing up there. Mike Marin, who's the state representative for that district, he talks very fondly about growing up there as a kid and spending a lot of time at Willow. So that's got to be top of the list. But the spillway at Lake of the Woods is kind of an embarrassment, honestly. There are the Homer Lake Interpretive Center. We're turning away classes of kids who are looking for environmental education, which is so important, connecting that next generation of kids to nature. And we're, we hate turning away classes of children. So those are probably my top three. And this funding will bring in, if it's approved, it would bring in about $700,000 a year to the district, a little less than $700,000. So even with the increase, it's, we're not going to be able to, we have about a $3.7 million backlog of projects that we need to address. We're not going to be able to do it all in 1 year, obviously. We're still going to have to bite off and just start, getting at that list as we can. But those would be my top three, I think. Andrew, maybe you have some other thoughts.
No, I think that echoes my, my thinking. Like Mary Ellen said, it's when you have a $3.7 million maintenance backlog and you say, even with $700,000 a year, that's going to take us a while, but it's the idea that can you try to leverage some of that with other grant funding? Are there things that we could potentially do to make those dollars stretch further? But it does, that maintenance only grows over time. And that's the tough thing, is that a lot of these facilities are old. They need repair. They need to be completely replaced, like the interpretive center. And you're just thinking, okay, well, since I started, a lot of those big projects are just, you kick the can down the road because you don't have the money to do it all. And eventually that catches up with you.
Hey guys, you have a great story for this, and the fact that there's never been a tax levy that's been approved on this is kind of a secret. I mean, I've never heard that before, and the numbers are pretty compelling. It's not a great deal of addition to a tax bill, although everybody is really, really, really fatigued with taxes in the state. But the fact that in 72 years it's not been approved is pretty compelling, and I'd not heard that. In addition to some of the other compelling numbers in the story, what are you guys doing to get that word out? I've not really seen a lot of effort, and it's a great story. I think that would really turn some opinions if you could get that out.
Well, and what we're doing is what we're doing right here this morning, is trying to meet with any group that will have us. We've had about, just since we went public with this. So the board took the vote on August 6th, and it was, we were kind of keeping it quiet until then. We were, we started this, really started this planning a few years ago to go to the voters in November of 2020. That was the plan. We wanted to take it to a general election to give it a, to give it a wide audience, I guess, and really take it to the election where you have the highest turnout. Of course, when we started the planning process, we didn't have something like a pandemic on the radar, and it honestly, the board spent some time early this spring, March, April, May. We spent some time at our board meetings, really talking about the timing and making sure that this was what we wanted to do. And in the end, obviously, we decided, because it is such a small ask, that we decided to keep it on the plan for this November. But since August 6th, so that's when it became public. That's when we started sort of hitting these rotaries and anybody who will invite us to have a presentation. So if you're part of any other groups, church groups, homeowners associations, it's a little tough. We would normally have public meetings. It's a little tough to just throw open the doors and have a big public meeting right now, but trying to get some press out there. We'll be doing some radio ads and TV ads and all of the things, the yard signs, of course. But yeah, if there's any suggestions that you have or ways to get our message out, obviously we need the help of any supporters who are willing to help us with that.
I have a question. What is the economic impact of the forest preserve in the state? In other words, what revenue into the county is that? Do you have an idea of what it's generating? And because obviously we're going to lose some of that if we allow it to deteriorate.
Yeah. Boy, I don't have a great figure for that right off the top of my head.
I've got some good anecdotal evidence on that, though. Mary Ellen mentioned this earlier in terms of the covered bridge, right? And that's something that Muhammad uses in terms of their promotional material because it's something they identify with. The other easy one is the red bridge at the Botanical Gardens, right? How many people have seen senior class photos or been to a wedding at the Botanical Gardens? Those are the kinds of things that, you know, there is a price tag, whether we have that number right now, but just understanding these sort of landmarks and the important place that places in people's lives. But then that's also tourism dollars. I mean,
that's what I mean. Tourism dollars.
Yeah, the last couple of years we've hosted a mini triathlon out at Lake of the Woods. You know, there's all kinds of things where you go, oh, that's done through there, in part because we recognize, you know, being good local partners with communities, other government agencies, businesses is in everyone's best interest. So yeah, it's definitely there.
I think one of the big draws for the Forest Preserve District is as quality of life issue for Champaign County. And I know, for instance, when the U of I is hiring people or trying to recruit staff and faculty, the people that they're recruiting take a look at the area. And if there's nothing to do, and if it's a barren landscape in the area that they're expected to move to, they're not going to move. We're competing with universities that have mountains and beaches and all kinds of other physical amenities. And if we don't have something to compete with, then people are going to not come to the U of I and go to other places. And so if we have things like rail trails and good forest preserve districts where people can go hiking and enjoy the bluebells and the birds, then we're not going to be able to compete. And we're competing on an international scale with the U of I. And so we have to have something for quality of life, and the Forest Preserve District can provide some of those amenities.
Great point, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
And I want to thank you. I want to stop you here. So folks, I hope you, Mary Ellen and Andrew, if you could stay around, if there's folks that want to ask more questions, if you don't mind staying for a few moments. So I'm going to go ahead and let the meeting in for folks that need to get on the road and or back to their other jobs or whatever that may be. So give me just a moment here, and I want to thank you guys. So round of applause. Thank you for coming. Obviously, this is a very supportive audience for you here. Let me go back to our desktop real quick. And just to remind everybody, as Bob said, our speaker for next week is Caleb Miller, Senior Vice President of Surgical Services for Carl Foundation. And he's going to talk about the COVID, and so Bob will be introducing him there. That's wonderful. Just a reminder, I did send out a survey. About 15 people have answered it so far. That's awesome. But please, if you haven't answered it, please go ahead. It will take 1 minute. That's what it looks like the average time it takes to fill it out. We just want to get some feedback before our next board meeting. And so now I'm going to turn it over like we've been doing more recently. I'm going to have just one person say the four-way test so that anybody out there in Facebook land can hear exactly what we're doing. And Alan has graciously agreed to do the four-way test for us. Alan?
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And is it fun?
Wonderful. And off at that, done for the day. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Ellen.